true that the low flyers had a club and helmet?
Yeah, we had one helmet for the whole club along with a one chain hoist. It was a fits-all.
Anyhow, so we'd go up and borrow a helmet from the SCTA at our meets because the SCTA was famous for its safety, and they really did a better job than anybody else at the time, but we still weren't doing anything very safely.
I can answer your question about what we were thinking. I had all that steel around me. I was perfectly protected. The only
Except
problem,
for your head.
Yeah. The only problem I had is the time I was making a run, I got up to 35 miles an hour, and the wheel broke. Now the wheel didn't just crack; the whole center came out of it. I was down on three legs, you might say. One of them dug into the dirt, and in an instant, I was airborne, head over head. And like you say, I didn't have any protection at all. And then I was able to look out and finally stop flipping. I don't know how many times, but I ended face up with the car in the right position. But I couldn't hardly breathe because all the wind had been knocked out of me. Every time I'd hit the ground, I'd land on my back and knock the air out. The other thing I had trouble with was a safety crew. They had an ambulance at the beginning and one at the end, and I'm in the middle. So I kept thinking, what are those cornballs thinking about? I need help. And I didn't realize till later on that they were doing the best they could once they found out where I was. So
I mentioned earlier on that if somebody was a year or 2 or 3 years older than you were when you were in your teens, they were like a hero to you. The difference now is not that remarkable, but in those days, these guys were really my heroes. And yes.
I was having a discussion with somebody here earlier tonight, and we were talking about wheels and tires and all things. And the topic came up that back in those days, the speeds were getting up 100, 120, 130, 140 miles an hour. What was the rating on the tire?
Well, most of them probably recaps. Because that's all anybody could afford, and I'm sure they found most of their tires in the junkyards and stuff like that.
with one exception.
With one exception.
On my car, I ran used Indianapolis Speedway tires. They were
don't laugh, that became the tire. Our Streamliner threw all the tread off the Firestone Rib racing tires at Bonneville that first year. The tire was rated at that time for 175. Nobody had even bothered to ask anybody that because the fastest hot rods were 160. So nobody ever asked Firestone, how fast will these tires go? But at 193, all the rubber came off both front tires. So we all went to Indian tires after that, Stu, because they didn't have any rubber on them. And that was our salvation in hot rodding, really, was running old Indian tires. But you were probably the first one that ever did that.
I think we were.
Yeah.
Well, I kind of started out after the war. I had a flathead or Ford with a little Krager head on it, and a Roadster, and drove that around a while. And then I got a 34 Roadster. And about that time, I started running short of that 5220 as I got out of the service. I went to work for a firm called Diet and Lasofsky. They were in LA. They were building midgets and Indy cars and some dirt cars. So I kind of learned quite a bit from both Luigi and Emil. And from then I went on a trip with Ford in 1958 where we built 2 prototype cars and went around the world with these 2 cars and camera car and 2 trucks that I'd helped construct back in Detroit. And then when that ended up...
Who were driving those trucks?
Fran Hernandez drove one, and I drove one, and Danny Ames, and Murray Jensen, who at the time we stole from Edelbrock, and a guy named Tom Smith. But anyway, when that pooped out, then I went back to work for a fellow named Sterling Edwards, who we'd built a car for at Emil and Dietz. It was a little tube frame car with a Ford 60 in it. The frame was 4-inch, 332 wall, 4130 tubing, and we had to make S bends in it. And I can remember this day, it took 3 of us to bend the tubes. One guy with a torch, and another guy to kind of steer it, and another guy hanging on the end of the pipe. So we built, it was a neat little car. It was designed by Norman Timms. It had a Ford independent front end, and the rear was a trailing arm with transverse torsion bars. And we drove it around without a body for a while, and decided, well, we'll build a body. So we built an aluminum body for it, and it's kind of a copy of an Italian coupe, which is called a Cistitalia. It was a neat looking little car. And we raced that a couple times. In fact, we won the first Palm Springs race for the thing. And at that time, I think Jaguar was bragging about their disc brakes that they'd run at Le Mans for the first time. But we'd run them a year and a half before on this little car. I was quite familiar with Ted Hallebrand, and I complained to him that the car just wouldn't stop with these little squeaky drum brakes we had. He said, why don't you put these disc brakes on it? And I didn't even know what he was talking about. So he says, go over at the airport. So we went over, and he had a Beach Bonanza airplane with these, time they call them spot brakes. So we converted this and made rotors and bolted these spot brakes on this little Ford 60. And from then on, the thing would really stop well. But we had a trouble with originally that you'd put the brakes on and the cylinders wouldn't retract. So we went from a round cylinder to a square O-rings, and that seemed to help the problem. And from there I went to San Francisco with Sterling Edwards. He had a big company up there, a wire rope company. And he said, well, let's build some more cars. So he decided he was going to build some road cars out of fiberglass. And he was quite thirsty. He used to hang around in the bars in Newport Beach. He ran into the fellow that developed the glass spar fiberglass boats. And from that, he said, well, why don't you build a fiberglass body? So he said, okay, we'll do one. So we took what was left from the wooden buck that we'd used to make these aluminum parts, and filled the thing full of foam and plaster and Bondo, and we made this shape of this car that he wanted to build. So he says, well, how do you do this? Well, you get the fiberglass and some cobalt and resin and catalyst, and you mix it up and you just stir all this crap together and lay it on the fiberglass. So we built this whole thing out of fiberglass, and when it came time to get it apart, we couldn't get it off the mold, so we started cutting it. And then we finally got it apart where we assembled it on this little Henry J. frame that he bought. And we finished the car and had it upholstered and took it over to the paint shop, and the guy spent about 2 weeks to do a really nice lacquer paint job on the thing, and brought it back, and we were really proud of it. And we got it out in the sun one day, which was kind of unfamiliar in South San Francisco, but anyway, we came out about an hour later, and the thing was all checkerboard, it all shrunk, and it looked like real junk. So from that, we realized that that wasn't the way to build cars, so we went to female molds and laid the things up with a gel coat and fiberglass. And from then on, we got to a point where you could get a fairly decent finish, although it was a long way from working in metal. And we also had a C-type Jag that we raced, which I wadded up at Pebble Beach. I was qualifying a car, and at that time we ran the old road course, and I came up over this hill, and just about the time I was getting ready to set a quick lap, a guy pulled out of the pits right in front of me, so I nailed him and took down a couple of pine trees and totaled this car. So he bought another one from a guy that they felt was incompetent to drive the next day, and he drove that. And then he decided to get married. He went to Italy. He got a 4-1 Ferrari to drive around on his honeymoon, and we raced that for a while. And then in the meantime, we had these Henry J's. We put a Hemi Chrysler in one with a 471 blower on the top. And that was a complete mistake. And about that time, I decided I'd had enough San Francisco. I didn't like the weather, so I came back down south and worked for Stu for a while. And I got an opportunity to work for Reventlow about the time we were doing the first Scarabs. So I was involved in that, and we did 3 roadsters and ran them fairly successfully. And then we decided we want to do a Formula One car. So we built 2 Formula One cars with a laid down 4-cylinder engine that had desmodromic valve gear in it, which was a valve gear that runs without springs. It runs fairly economically because there's no load of valve springs. And we built a 1-cylinder test model, and the thing worked real well. So we incorporated that in the car. The engine was designed by Leo Goose and Meyer Drake. And unfortunately, it didn't produce enough horsepower to be competitive with the other cars because it needed a lot of development. Anyway, we took the 2 cars to Europe, and first race was at Monaco, and I think we were the last car to qualify. And we ran a couple more races, one in Holland, and we ran another one at Spa, which is a real long, high-speed course in Belgium. And we were just about as unsuccessful as that. So